It all started with a letter. A simple, innocuous piece of paper that slid into my mailbox like a snake slithering into a garden. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was used to the occasional junk mail, the flyers for local pizza joints, and the coupons I'd never use. But this letter was different. It was addressed to me, Ethan Carter, in bold, official-looking font. The return address read, Maplewood Homeowners Association. I tore it open, half expecting another reminder to trim my hedges or repaint my mailbox. But what I read made my blood boil. Dear homeowner, it began, we have noticed several violations on your property that require immediate attention. Violations? On my property? I nearly choked on my coffee. I scanned the list of so-called infractions. Wrong shade of beige on the fence. Flower beds not regulation height. Unauthorized vehicle parked in driveway. My own truck, a perfectly legal Ford F-150, was labeled an unauthorized vehicle. It was like being smothered by a beige blanket of bureaucracy. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash. I wasn't part of their HOA. Never had been, never would be. I'd bought this house precisely because it was outside the jurisdiction of any homeowners association. I valued my freedom too much to let a bunch of power-hungry busybodies tell me what color I could paint my fence or how high my flowers could grow. But the letters kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. They threatened fines, liens, even legal action. It was harassment, plain and simple, and it was about to escalate in ways I could never have imagined. Fed up, I decided to confront the HOA directly. I marched down to their office, armed with my property deed and a truckload of frustration. That's where I met Margaret Whitaker, the HOA president. Picture a woman in her late 50s, with a Karen haircut and a permanent scowl etched onto her face. She looked like she'd been born clutching a clipboard and a list of rules. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice dripping with faux politeness. We've been trying to reach you about the violations on your property. I'm not part of your HOA, I said, slamming my property deed on her desk. Never have been, never will be. Margaret's smile didn't waver. Oh, but you are. Your property falls within our jurisdiction. You signed the agreement when you bought the house. I did no such thing, I shot back. And even if I did, which I didn't, you can't just impose your rules on me without my consent. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. We'll see about that. I left the office feeling like I'd made my point. But I was wrong. The harassment didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. More letters. Unannounced inspections. Neighborhood gossip. It was like dealing with termites. No matter how many times I sprayed them, they just kept coming back. It was supposed to be a quiet night at home. I just settled into my favorite armchair, ready to unwind after another day of battling HOA nonsense. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. That should have been my first clue that something was off. Then I heard it, a crunch of gravel outside my window. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a stray cat. But then came another sound, hushed voices, barely audible. My heart started racing. This wasn't some nocturnal critter looking for a midnight snack. I crept to my security camera monitor, trying to keep my footsteps silent. The screens flickered to life, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Two figures dressed in what looked like police uniforms were skulking around my property. But something about their movement seemed off. Real cops don't sneak around like that. I had a choice to make. Call the real cops or handle this myself. The adrenaline was pumping, and I knew every second counted. What if these guys were here to do more than just snoop around? The FBI reports over 1 million burglaries a year, and a lot of those happen at night when folks are home. I made my decision. Quietly, I moved to my gun safe and pulled out my pistol. The weight of it in my hand was reassuring. Now, I'm not looking for trouble, but I know my rights. In many states, homeowners can use reasonable force to protect themselves and their property. And two strangers creeping around my backyard in the middle of the night? That's about as reasonable as it gets. Heart pounding, I made my way through the house. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I could hear them more clearly now. They were right outside my back door, whispering to each other. He's got to be home, one of them said. Margaret wants this done tonight. Margaret, as in Margaret Whitaker, the HOA president. My blood went from cold to boiling in an instant. This wasn't just trespassing. This was a whole new level of crazy. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. My hand was steady on the doorknob. In one quick motion, I yanked it open and stepped out, pistol raised. "Freeze!" I shouted. The look on their faces was priceless. Two guys decked out in cheap police costumes, staring down the barrel of my gun. Their eyes were wide as saucers, and I swear one of them let out a little squeak. "We're police officers," the taller one stammered. "We have the right." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "I know you're not cops, and you're trespassing on my property." That's when things got interesting. The shorter one, his face twisted with panic, reached for something at his hip. In that split second, time seemed to slow down. I saw the glint of metal, and my training kicked in. "Don't even think about it," I barked. He froze, hand hovering over what I now saw was a taser. Smart move on his part. I may not be a spring chicken anymore, but I can still shoot straight. "Now," I said, keeping my voice level, "you two are going to sit down right there and wait for the real police to arrive. And trust me, they're on their way." They didn't have much choice. They plopped down on my lawn, looking like a pair of kids caught stealing cookies. I kept my gun trained on them, my other hand dialing 911. When the actual police showed up, boy, did these fake cops try to spin a tale. They claimed I had attacked them first, that they were just doing their job. But here's a little tip for you. Always have cameras. Because when the officer saw the footage of these clowns sneaking around my property, the jig was up. The news of the arrest spread through our quiet suburb like wildfire. My phone blew up with texts and calls from neighbors. Some were shocked, others supportive. A few even claimed I was making it all up. But watching the HOA scramble was the best part. I could practically hear the panicked board meeting from my living room. Margaret's desperate phone call the next morning was the cherry on top. "Listen," she hissed, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm sure we can work something out. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. What if we made it worth your while to keep things quiet?" I nearly laughed out loud. Did she really think she could buy my silence after what they'd put me through? "Margaret," I said, savoring every word, "you couldn't afford my silence if you mortgaged every house in this neighborhood." I hung up, leaving her spluttering. But as satisfying as that was, I had a decision to make. Should I settle for whatever pathetic offer they'd scrape up, or should I take this all the way to court and expose every dirty secret this HOA had been hiding? That's when I noticed some unusual activity at the HOA office. Through my binoculars, I could see people rushing in and out, carrying boxes of files. They were destroying evidence, shredding documents, deleting emails, probably burning sage to cleanse the place of their bad karma. In that moment, my decision crystallized. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every homeowner who'd ever been pushed around by an overzealous HOA. Every family who'd been harassed over the height of their grass or the color of their shutters. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Hey, Steve," I said. "Yeah, it's me. Remember that HOA situation we talked about? Well, it just got a whole lot bigger. I want to take them to court. No holds barred." Steve let out a low whistle. "You sure about this? It could get ugly." I glanced out my window at the HOA office, still buzzing with panicked activity. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Enter Jack Hawkins, the kind of lawyer who makes other attorneys wake up in a cold sweat. When I walked into his office, I could practically smell the victory in the air. Jack leaned back in his chair, grinning. "So, you're the David taking on Goliath," he said. "I've been waiting for someone to challenge that HOA. Let's make them squirm." We got to work right away. Jack was like a bloodhound, sniffing out every legal angle we could use. He laid out our game plan. Bury them in evidence, security footage, witness statements, property records. Countersue for emotional distress and legal fees. Prove harassment and potential conspiracy. Homeowners who take on HOAs win about 30 to 50% of the time, Jack said. But with what we've got, I like our odds a lot better. I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. What about their legal team? Jack just laughed. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. We're not just going after the HOA's pockets. We're going after the board members personally. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly. I gathered every scrap of documentation I could find, while Jack dug up old property laws that could be our secret weapon. The HOA's lawyers tried to drown us in paperwork, but Jack wasn't fazed. "They're scared," he said during one strategy session. "We've got them on the ropes, and they know it." As the court date approached, I could see the panic in Margaret's eyes whenever I passed her on the street. The HOA office was a flurry of activity. They were scrambling, and it showed. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. 2 days before court, Jack called me, his voice vibrating with excitement. "Ethan," he said, "Ted just came forward with a bombshell. He's got emails from Margaret explicitly ordering those fake cops to intimidate you. This isn't just harassment anymore. We're talking conspiracy." I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the smoking gun we needed to blow the case wide open. "With this," Jack said, "we're not just looking at winning the case. We're talking about setting a precedent. HOAs across the country are going to think twice before pulling stunts like this." As we prepared for our day in court, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing up to bullies everywhere who thought they could trample over people's rights. And with Jack by my side, I was ready for battle. The morning of the trial, I felt like David stepping into the ring with Goliath. My slingshot, a mountain of evidence ready to knock the HOA flat. As I walked into that courtroom, the air crackled with tension. Margaret's face went white as a sheet when she saw us. Her eyes darted around, probably searching for an escape route. "Too late, Margaret. Game over." The HOA's lawyer started his spiel, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Lies and misdirection flowed like a broken faucet. They painted me as some troublemaker, ruining their perfect little community. If only they knew what was coming. Jack Hawkins, cool as ever, stood up and started laying out our case. With every word, Margaret's face lost more color. Then came the knockout punch. Those fake cops took the stand, and one of them spilled everything about Margaret's scheme to intimidate me. It was like watching dominoes fall. The judge's expression shifted from skeptical to downright annoyed. At one point, he even said, "Homeowners associations cannot unilaterally take private property. That's not how property law works." I wanted to jump up and cheer right then, but Jack wasn't done. He pulled out our ace, the security footage showing everything. The judge leaned in, suddenly very interested. "I want to see this," he said, his eyes glued to the screen. As the video played, showing those fake cops sneaking around my property like cartoon burglars, you could hear a pin drop. The HOA's lawyer was sweating bullets, realizing his case was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. When it finished, the judge looked like he'd aged a decade. He turned to the HOA's lawyer and demanded, "Counselor, do you have any explanation for what we've just seen?" The poor guy stammered something about a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. As Jack wrapped up, I felt a surge of pride. We'd done it. We'd taken on Goliath and won. The judge's ruling was crystal clear. He dismissed all the HOA's claims and granted my counterclaim for harassment, trespassing, and emotional distress. But he didn't stop there. The judge ordered a full investigation into the HOA's practices, citing concerns about abuse of power and potential illegal activities. Margaret looked ready to faint. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. As we left the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just changed the game. No more would HOAs think they could bully people into submission. No more would they act like little dictators in their own fiefdoms. We'd shown that when regular folks stand up and fight back, even the mightiest Goliath can fall. The $50,000 judgment for damages was just the beginning. The judge ordered a full investigation into the HOA's practices, and every sketchy decision and abuse of power came tumbling out. Margaret's face was a sight to behold. Picture a cartoon character going through all 5 stages of grief in 30 seconds, ending with her face turning an impressive shade of purple as she screeched, "This is ridiculous. We were just trying to maintain property values." But oh, yes, they could do this to them. And they did. This ruling wasn't just about me anymore. It sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. Suddenly, every homeowner who had ever felt bullied by the HOA saw a light at the end of the tunnel. People started coming forward with their own stories of HOA overreach. The process of dismantling the HOA's power structure was like watching a house of cards collapse. Their authority over properties was invalidated. Their bylaws were torn to shreds. All those years of pushing people around, and now they were the ones being pushed right out of their cushy positions of power. While we waited to see if they would appeal, spoiler alert, they didn't have a leg to stand on. Rumors swirled about potential criminal charges for the board members. Turns out, when you're found to have acted outside your legal authority, you can't hide behind the HOA shield anymore. The tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every day brought new whispers, new revelations. It was like living in a real-life soap opera, only with less attractive people and more property law. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any better, the HOA filed for bankruptcy. They were done. Finished. Kaput. The cherry on top? This whole debacle set a precedent. HOAs across the country were on notice. Abuse your power, and you might find yourself on the wrong end of a judge's gavel. It wasn't just about our little corner of the world anymore. We'd started a revolution in homeowners' rights. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, I was about to serve up a feast that would make Gordon Ramsay proud. The main course? A little something I call malicious compliance, with a side of be careful what you wish for. I had this fat settlement check burning a hole in my pocket, courtesy of our now-defunct HOA. But instead of riding off into the sunset, I had one last trick up my sleeve. They'd spent years telling me how my property should look. It was time to return the favor in a way they'd never forget. I marched down to the city planning office, grinning like a Cheshire cat. I'd like to apply for a building permit, I told the clerk. For what exactly, she asked. I leaned in close and whispered, the biggest, baddest billboard this town has ever seen. The clerk's eyes widened. A billboard? On residential property? I nodded. Yep. And it's all perfectly legal. I spent the next hour going over local zoning laws and property rights with her. Turns out, when you know the rules inside and out, you can make them work for you. As I left the office, permit in hand, I could already hear the whispers starting. Did you hear? That guy's planning a billboard in our neighborhood. I just smiled and waved. The fun was just beginning. Construction started the next week. You should have seen the faces of my former HOA buddies when the trucks rolled up. They tried everything to stop me. They called the city, threatened legal action, even tried to bribe the construction workers. But nothing worked. I had all my ducks in a row, and they knew it. Finally, the big day arrived. A crowd had gathered on my lawn, muttering and speculating. I stood before them, feeling like a ringmaster about to start the show. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, I present to you the fruits of our labor. With a flourish, I pulled down the tarp covering the billboard. There, in letters big enough to see from space, was a message that made Margaret's jaw hit the floor. Attention HOA, this land is not yours. Stay off it. The crowd went wild. Some cheered, some laughed, some just stood there in shock. Margaret, red-faced and sputtering, stormed over. You can't do this, she shrieked. I just held up my permit. Actually, I can. And I did. That billboard became more than just a giant middle finger to the HOA. It became a symbol, a rallying cry for homeowners who were sick and tired of being pushed around. People started coming from all over to take pictures with it. It even made the local news. As the dust settled on our epic showdown with the HOA, I realized we'd sparked something bigger than a neighborhood spat. Our rebellion had lit a fire, spreading faster than gossip at a church potluck. Walking down our street felt different now. People were out in their yards, chatting and laughing. Mrs. Johnson proudly showed off her freshly painted purple front door. I've always wanted to do this, she told me with a wink. Guess I don't need to worry about any fines now, do I? The real surprise came when I ran into Ted at the hardware store. He was loading up on paint and lumber, a gleam in his eye I'd never seen before. You know, he said, hefting a bag of cement, I've been wanting to build a workshop in my backyard for years. The HOA always shut me down. But now I'm going to make it happen. This was exactly what we'd fought for, the freedom to make our homes truly ours, and a sense of community built on mutual respect rather than fear and rules. Our victory wasn't just changing our little corner of the world. Word was spreading fast. I got a call from a guy 2 towns over, asking how we'd done it. We've been trying to dissolve our HOA for years, he said, his voice a mix of hope and desperation. Can you help us? Before I knew it, I was giving impromptu seminars in people's living rooms, sharing our story and offering advice. It felt good to help, to see that spark of determination in their eyes. As more neighborhoods followed our lead, interesting things started happening. Property values in our area actually went up. Turns out, when people feel empowered to improve their homes without arbitrary restrictions, they tend to do just that. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Without the HOA's constant nagging, some folks let their properties go a bit. We had to find a new way to address these issues, one that didn't involve fines or threats. That's when Sarah, a retired mediator, stepped up. She organized community meetings where we could voice concerns and work together to find solutions. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the old system. As word of our success spread, we started hearing about new alternatives to traditional HOAs popping up in other areas. It felt like we were part of something bigger, a shift in how people thought about community and property rights. But with all this change came new challenges. Without the HOA's insurance and legal muscle, we had to figure out how to handle things like common area maintenance and potential disputes between neighbors. It was a learning curve, but one we were all committed to navigating together. As I looked out at our transformed neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We'd done more than just kick out a bunch of busybodies with clipboards. We'd shown that when people come together, they can build something stronger than any rulebook. And that, my friends, is the real power of community. The HOA sent fake cops, and one of them ended up shot. I stood my ground, but not everyone gets that chance. What if I hadn't had security cameras? What if I hadn't known my rights? If this happened to you, how would you handle it? The truth is, HOAs have too much power, and too often, they abuse it. But as we've shown, when homeowners stand together, we can take that power back. It's not easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, your home is your castle. And no one, not an HOA, not a fake cop, not even a Margaret Whitaker, has the right to take that away from you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.